Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven. WNHH-FM, your home for community radio in New Haven. This is Paul Bast, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community and our world tick. We have a special guest today to help us make sense of something we care a lot about in New Haven, even though it's happening in another part of the world. Welcome back to the WNHH studio to Tzippy Shmilovitz, an American correspondent who lives in New Haven for Israel's largest circulation print newspaper, Yediot Achronot. Welcome, Tzippy, and nice to see you.
Hey, Paul. Thanks for having me.
It's nice to be on the other side of this pandemic.
Yes.
And to see you in person. We did do one Zoom interview during the pandemic, and you look like you made it through okay.
Yes, I survived.
You did it? Did you get COVID?
No, I did not.
I'm glad to hear that. I didn't either. We were all careful.
Yeah.
Now we're back in the studio.
That's good.
And as everybody knows, we do an 11-day war just finished in the country where your newspaper is based, where you grew up, in Israel and Gaza Strip. And it was a brutal war, 11 days, over 250 people killed, the vast majority of them Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip. There were hundreds of homes destroyed, mosques, hospitals, 4,300 missiles fired, if I'm not mistaken, into Israel. So it was quite an 11 days. What was that like for you as personally, Tzippy, as an Israeli and as a reporter? How did it affect you?
Well, it's scary when you're here. You don't really know what's going on. The thing about these cycles that happens every 2 or 3 years is that in between them, we forget that people on the south of Israel, this is their daily life for the past 15 years. So then come those cycles, and suddenly in Tel Aviv, they feel it. And when they feel it in Tel Aviv, it's a completely different story. I mean, it's completely unfair. It's like the difference between something terrible that happens in New York and something that happens in some rural county in Missouri, and the way the media treat it is completely different.
And Tzippy, if you don't mind, can you move your mic facing you just so we can hear you more carefully? Thanks.
Yeah, that's better.
Yep, thanks.
So the same thing happened here. Most of my family is in Tel Aviv.
Oh.
So when something happened and missiles reach Tel Aviv, suddenly you're incredibly scared. While the rest of the time, it's over there on the south, and we don't feel it. So you react completely differently, just as a person, as a human being.
And then how about the daily reality? So for Israelis on the other side of Gaza Strip, outside the Gaza Strip, and until this war at Tel Aviv largely was protected from missiles, it's something that every once in a while happens, and then you're ducking into shelters and you're scared.
Yeah.
Whereas for Palestinians living in Gaza, it's an everyday, whether it's small hardships or fears for their life or homes being destroyed. I mean, that is a dual reality, right?
It is, and it's incredibly complicated situation. I think people tend to look for who started first. There is not a real answer for that, and the way I see it is that people focus too much on the past and the history, and nobody is trying to fix the situation as it is now. It really doesn't matter who was first, because we don't really know anything.
And both sides have claims, historical claims that are accurate that they start the story at.
Exactly. So this is a cycle that will never end until someone breaks it.
Mm.
And there were attempts to break it. I think the closest we were was 1995. And then
when Bill Clinton hosted Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin
and
at
then,
the White House.
And then, because it was so close, Rabin was assassinated. And then there were other attempts. Ehud Barak tried, and Ehud Olmert tried. And you can say that Israel did not go far enough in trying, because we are the powerful player in this game. But at the same time, you didn't see a Palestinian leader emerge with the courage to yeah, let's sit down and do what we can, knowing that no one will get everything they want.
So before we dial back to the roots of it and the need for getting past history to a solution, I'm a little more interested about how it affected you personally. So here you are in New Haven.
Yeah.
You're writing for an Israeli newspaper. You're living on Audubon Street. You're also emerging from a pandemic.
Yeah.
Were you scared for the lives of your family?
Yeah, of course.
And was everybody okay? Were you getting calls in the middle of the night? We're in a bomb shelter?
They're all okay due to the time difference. Then, yeah, you spend the night not really sleeping very well because you really don't know what's going on over there. On the other hand, I don't want to dramatize it too much. My family is in Tel Aviv. They're okay. They went to the shelter. But
no, it's funny. I think now. I know this is not the same thing because our lives aren't at stake. But I think about like here in New Haven, if I have inconveniences or situations I don't like because of anti-Semitism,
yeah,
which exists, but it's not rampant, but it exists. I feel odd sometimes bringing it up and talking about how it affects me when I think of the much greater daily prejudice faced by black people in New Haven, right? So I feel like I don't want to equate inconveniences, things that aren't nice in an overall society where I'm living with agency and not being victimized. And I just wonder if that's true for Israelis too. If you feel you have very real threats and rockets are coming at your homes, and that's real.
Yeah,
and thinking every day how Palestinians live in the Gaza Strip. I just wonder if that's...
I think it's something that people may think about when on peacetime, but when you get those 11 days, and this is something that was very obvious in those 11 days, it doesn't matter how lefty you are, how much you feel for the Palestinians. When you get hit by rockets, you don't see anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same goes to Israelis who live overseas and maybe disagree with Netanyahu government and maybe disagree with Israel policies. When the war is going on, you take a step back because at the end of the day, yeah, we sit here in New Haven and we don't get any rockets on our head.
Right.
So you take a step back and you just worry about your family back then.
Mm-hmm.
But when this thing ends, and it happens again, I think it's the 5th time in the last 11 years that we had this massive cycle.
But the first and 7, right?
Right.
The
yeah.
other cycles are coming closer together.
Yeah, I think it was 2008. Yeah.
Through 2014.
To 10, 20, 12, 14, and it's the 5th time in 12 years.
Mm.
So, but at the end, something must be done to end this thing. And I think our biggest problem now is that most people don't think that this is solvable. And it just, yeah, it is what it is. And we're going to have to live with this reality every few years. It's not going to work. These things are going to explode at some point. People in Gaza lives in horrible condition. It's not sustainable.
You know, there is a bet that I think the Netanyahu government took, and the right, that it was sustainable for the following reason. That Arab governments that used to feel pressure to support Palestinians have supported them less over recent years, and quietly, you know, there's all different fights in the Arab world, you know, much better than I do, Shiites versus Sunni, Iran versus Saudi Arabia. And then you had the Abraham Accords. You had governments quietly making cold peaces with Israel.
Yeah.
They're not really fighting for the Israeli Palestinians until this war. The Palestinian cause really was forgotten. So the right wing in Israel, I think, did feel like it could muddle along. I think it might still feel that way too. Like every bunch of years have a war where you set back Hamas. You don't destroy all the tunnels. You don't destroy the missiles. Hamas feels like every bunch of years they can fire missiles to scare Israel and, you know, strengthen their support among Palestinians. And I think, I could be wrong, but I think there's a feeling among Hamas leaders and Israeli right-wing leaders in the government that they can every few years just have this terrible conflagration of death and destruction and then retreat until it happens the next time and keep their short-term control. Am I accurately seeing that?
Yes, yes.
But you think that's not sustainable? You think at some point it explodes?
I think if we look at history, it's not sustainable. You just can't keep going on this way and control other people who live in a worsening and worsening condition. It's not. I don't think it's sustainable. But you are absolutely right that Hamas and the extreme right wing in Israel, they're good friends.
Right. They knew what they needed to do. They needed to pick up the phone. Hamas support was declining, so if they fire missiles, they're strong. Netanyahu's trying to get out of jail after not winning 4 elections, so he has to rally people around a war. I mean, it seemed kind of naked to the outside eye.
Yeah. It seems like a strange coincidence that Hamas started to shoot right when Yair Lapid was about to form a government.
Well, that's the Friedman theory, which I'd like to get to. I just want to remind people that you're listening to Dateline New Haven on WNHH-FM. You're home for community radio at 103.5 FM. Talking to one of the most interesting people who live in New Haven, Tzippy Shmilovitz, who lives in New Haven and is a reporter based here for Israel's largest circulation print newspaper, Yediot Ahronot. Were you writing about any of this? Like, what have you been writing about the last few months?
Well, just from the American perspective, the Biden administration, and just nothing that was incredibly important as opposed to what you write when you're there from the ground.
But what are your editors saying? Tzippy, we need X. Is it about the war? Or is it about other things? Like, what are they assigning you to do?
Oh, during this time, it's just about the war. But overall, I just covered America, so it's the American politics. And if something that is not related to the wars we have there, then I write about that. But during the last few weeks, it was all about the war.
Well, you know what interested me about American politics and the war? So everyone was writing during the war about what should U.S. try to do to stop it, thinking the way we did for many years, that Israel kind of listened to what the U.S. said.
Yeah.
There was a really interesting analysis that I'm interested in your opinion on in the Times this morning, where they said, you know what? We're getting past the point where Israel is so dependent completely on the U.S., and I'm not sure this is bad for either the Palestinians or the Israeli Jews. They're saying, in the 1980s, 10% of the U.S., of the Israeli government income came from U.S. aid. It's now under 1%. Many of the weapons are created there. That while, of course, it's a crucial relationship, that we might be reaching a point, and we might have seen it this last week, because this war might have just gone according to Hamas and Israel want to do it, and it was just papering over and make it look like there was negotiation to stop it. Like, Netanyahu and Hamas were pretending to do what they did, and they stopped. I wonder if ultimately it really is up to the Palestinians and the Israelis to settle this thing, and that if U.S. is less influential, that might be okay.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's absolutely up to the Israelis, Palestinians. I think one problem is that the United States it's not an honest broker. It's pretty clear where the United States stands.
Right, they don't have credibility.
Yeah, so I don't think the Palestinians are going to listen to anything the United States has to say.
Should it be the broker? I'm not sure. No. I'm kind of with Biden. I think deep down, Biden's people say we have responsibility to deal with it. They deal with domestic politics, which is to show that they're strongly for Israel. But I think he came in not really focused on the Middle East.
No. I think it's a lesson that he learned. He's so experienced that it's a waste of time.
U.S. can't solve it.
And it's a waste of political capital. He doesn't need to invest. You go and you try to make peace in the Middle East. It never works.
Right.
And you lose a lot of support at home. And he came in and he had many crises to deal with here. And he said, we'll intervene when we really need. So there's a war, and they tried and they stopped it. 11 days. The last time, 2014, it was 50 days. So 11 days, it's kind of quick.
But that wasn't because of the U.S., right? That was because Netanyahu and Hamas felt like they were done, right?
Yes and no. I don't know if anyone knows exactly.
Right.
What we do know is that in the last 48 hours, Biden's tone has changed when he talked to Netanyahu, and it was much more forceful, and it's time to wrap it up.
I guess I gotta believe, Tzippy, that I'm skeptical of any official account of how world leaders talk. I believe they really have their conversations in private. Or even like with Hamas and Netanyahu, they don't even need the conversation. They understand.
Yeah.
Biden needed, as the war went on, Biden needed to show the left flank of the Democratic Party that he wasn't just supporting the missiles, but he was dragging that out because he needed to keep the traditional support from pro-Israel forces. I was really skeptical that Netanyahu really cared about the tone from Biden, or Hamas cared about the tone from Biden.
Hamas for sure. I don't know. I mean, I read this op-ed this morning in the New York Times, and I agree that the U.S. influence in Israel is not as it was, and the leverage is not as big, but it's still there.
Right.
It's clearly still there. That's why even now, the one thing that really scared Israelis is that U.S. will start to put condition on any kind of military aid.
And one of the Jewish U.S. senators, Bernie Sanders, has a proposal in for, I believe it's $370 million of aid, a tranche of aid that's coming up to put conditions on it.
Yeah. And conditions, that's a problem. And I still think that Biden, he told Netanyahu that it's time to wrap it up, and he did. So the influence is still there. I think that Netanyahu tried to see if he can play, quote unquote, Biden as it did to Trump for 4 years. He absolutely played him. Mm-hmm. And I think he realized it's going to be a little different now. And the US still has some power. And in this game, I do agree that it feels like the Biden administration isn't going to get involved in any of this.
So, Tzippy, both sides claim victory in this war.
Of course.
Hamas said it accomplished its objectives to show Israel that it can reach far deeper with missiles than you thought. And while 90% of them might be intercepted by the Iron Dome, 10% are not, and they're reaching Tel Aviv in numbers. Netanyahu says he accomplished his goal. He went in there, and was it 40% of the tunnels that were underground tunnels that are used for transporting weapons were destroyed, that they took out a lot of Hamas leaders. I guess the Palestinians also say it kind of shows the cost in a more dramatic way to the world to revive their awareness of the death and destruction in Gaza. Do you think either side won?
No, nobody won. Nobody won. Israel for sure didn't win. What exactly did we win?
Well, I guess Netanyahu would say that it pushed back for a bunch of years Hamas's capacity to create more destruction.
So they'll recharge.
Yeah.
It's going to take them another 2 years, and they'll recharge. I will tell you who won. Netanyahu.
Right. Do you think, now does this mean that Netanyahu was on the ropes? He 4 straight elections failed to produce a new government in the last 2 years? And
yes, 2 years.
This is the theory Thomas Friedman had in the New York Times, that the day Israel either went into the mosque and stormed a mosque, setting off these events, there was about to be an historic government form that did not include Netanyahu, but did, and this is the thing I can't understand, it included for the first time an Arab party and a right-wing Israeli party, Jewish party, that's against any cooperation with Arabs, and it's for building in the settlements.
Yeah.
Is Friedman right that was going to be the government? And how could that government form?
The point was, let's form a government that will replace Netanyahu.
So he can be prosecuted for corruption.
So we can return to some form of democracy and normalcy. And they weren't going to get any big decisions. They would leave the settlement, and nothing that can break this government was ever going to be discussed. The point was, let's form what they called a change government, and start over. And this kind of government would probably hold, I don't know, 2 years,
You think 2 years?
maybe.
Like people in our country don't follow parliamentary systems so much. If you have a coalition that's barely in government because you have enough party with enough seats
Yeah.
that they have a slight majority, but if any one party leaves, you lose that.
Yeah.
So if the Arab Party, would they have 4 seats? If they pull out, it's over. If the right-wing Jewish party that hates the Arabs pulls out, you're done.
Yeah.
At some point, aren't there decisions they have to make that on which they're diametrically opposed?
Could be. I think they would just decide that they're not going to go to any hot button subject. Let's just get the country back on its
And the
feet.
settler governments would be okay with that.
Yeah.
And then if Hamas wants to ruin it by throwing missiles and there's a response, isn't that what happened? That now this government can't form because the Arab parties can no longer join it?
Exactly. Yeah.
So Netanyahu accomplished that. And because Hamas doesn't want Arabs in the Israeli government, right? They want to get rid of Israel.
And Hamas wants Netanyahu in charge.
Right.
It's been working very well for them. Very well for them. It's been 15 years. And
Right. If you had a government that included Arabs and that moved on from the hot button issues and made things better, that hurts Hamas and it hurts Netanyahu. Yeah.
exactly. And even worse, what we've seen in the last 11 days is the fabric of the coexistence between Arab and Jews inside Israel in the mixed cities,
Like Lod. And,
Lod and Ramleh and Jaffa, and there were a lot of violence incidents.
I want to ask you more about that. That was really interesting and obviously one of the saddest parts and revealing parts of this war. We're talking about the Gaza war with Tzippy Shmilovitz, the American correspondent for Israel's largest circulation print newspaper, Yediot Ahronot. She lives in New Haven. It's been a lot of years now. How many years have you been here?
3.
So you're a New Havener, you feel like?
It's nice here.
Well, I'm glad you're here. So that was an interesting part that was different this time. There are cities you don't hear about in Israel where Arabs and Jews live side by side, allegedly get along, coexist peacefully. That ended this time in a lot of those cities. There were mobs going after each other to kill each other, hurt each other, burn down their houses, see street violence. One thing I was reading, I think it was Washington Post maybe, that the Arab citizens of those cities said it wasn't true. Like there was like a right-wing Jewish guy in one of the places said, we're moving in to take over the city, but we're getting along with everyone. We're seeing them every day. We're not like those liberals who think about it in concept. And we say hello in the morning. Then they interview the Arab residents of the city, villages or the cities who say that's not true. They won't say hello us in the morning. And they are very specifically saying we want to uproot you. Was there real peaceful coexistence? Was it a charade that got revealed, or is the truth is always more complicated?
Probably both. Yes, it's in between. There is a sort of coexistence which rely mostly on the fact that we love Arab food, so we go to have a lot of good hummus, and it's coexistent, but still citizens of different degrees, and it's been quiet, and on the surface everything was really fine. I mean, you have a city like Haifa, which really was a model to how Arab and Jews can live together in Israel, but under the surface, at the end of what happened in the last few years, you had the nationality law that Netanyahu passed a few years ago.
Made Arabs officially second-class citizens.
Officially made them second-class citizens. And so a lot of stuff happened in aggregate, and it just waited for the match. And then came all this mess in Jerusalem. I'm not even talking about Hamas in Gaza. The mess in Jerusalem, that I think was that match.
What happened that the police went in to rip out the loudspeakers at a mosque because the President Rivlin was giving a speech nearby? They didn't want it drowned out.
There's a
Did
lot.
that really happen?
There's a lot of stories.
That blew my mind.
Some of it is true and some of it isn't. The fact is that Arab Israelis are a second-class citizen, and I think what we see now is what's going to happen if Israeli-Palestinian crisis won't be solved. You're just going to have a one big state with a lot of fractions and privileges, and it's not going to end well. It's not going to end well for us as a Jewish state. We need to separate. We need it.
So you're still...
Otherwise, we are moving very fast towards an apartheid state.
So you still support a two-state solution?
Oh yeah, of course.
Now some people say that's not realistic.
Yeah, I agree that it's not realistic. I still think that that's the only solution. It's not realistic because the condition on the ground. Israel is an extremely right-wing country now. It's a massive majority.
It's nationalistic, like much of the world.
Yes.
Has turned, like our country turned to some extent.
Not the same.
Right.
Not the same. I mean, you have a big part in the United States who became that. But then you have, I mean, there was an election in 2020 that ended differently.
Right. 82 million people voted.
It's not the same. In Israel, you don't have the... In Israel, the question is whether you'll have a full right-wing government or you have some mixture because Netanyahu won't move. But it's not about ideology. It's just about whether you agree to sit with Netanyahu or not. But everybody is right-wing. It's just the inside game. It's not difference of ideology.
And I wonder, tell me if I'm putting words in your mouth. So on the one hand, you say, okay, on the one hand, you're saying it's not realistic, a two-state solution. It's the only solution, one you'd like to see happen. Is part of the reason you could still hold on to that is because history has shown, whether it was India, whether it was liberation movements in Africa, whether it was peace in Northern Ireland, or whether it was gay rights in America, developments that we believe aren't realistic because of political realities on the ground, that sometimes the unrealistic happens.
Yes, and I think history shows that situations like this one, they are unsustainable. And
so while it's not realistic for a two-state solution, it's also not realistic to think this can be sustainable, status quo.
Oh yeah.
So something's got to break.
Oh yeah, I think the two-state solution is much more realistic than thinking that status quo can. I mean, I guess on paper it can continue. People just go on and die and die and die. But again, looking at history, I don't see it. It's where else in the world there is a situation in which a country control other people who lives in a dire conditions. It cannot, and especially in the world today that is so much more, partly it is more nationalistic, but on the other hand it becomes more liberal and pluralistic, and you see it in the United States. The ground is shifting when it comes to the way people treat the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's very different now.
So Tzippy, do you have hope?
I'm Jewish, so I am hopeless, but we have to survive. So you have to have hope. Otherwise, what's the point?
Mm-hmm. I agree with you on that one. I think we should end on that. Just tell me what your plans are. Are you going to be here for a while?
In New Haven? Well, it's decision time for me right now. So I may stay. I may go back to New York. We'll see.
Well, I hope we get, as long as we have you, it's always great to have you. And
Thank
I
you, Paul.
appreciate, Tzippy Shmilovitz, that you make time
Oh, thank you for
while
having me.
writing for Israel's largest circulation print paper, Yediot and Achronot, where there still are print papers,
Yeah,
to make time to visit us here on Dateline New Haven.
thank you.
Thanks for all that wisdom and nuance. I tell you,
My
know what,
pleasure.
I'm glad
Thank you.
And lucky. And thanks everyone for listening to us. Thanks to Harry Droz, the best station manager in the universe. Lucky to have him here at WNHH. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.